this morning I got sent a new promo that Tony got recorded over the weekend. And, we use an internal messaging file sharing. And I got it. I watched it, posted up. This is unbelievable. Like, how did you get this guy promo? And one of my employees was like, "Are you fanboying out right now?" And it's like, it's called marketing when you do it. So I'll put it out. I've been a fan almost my entire life, and some of the guys who are getting involved are making me be like, "This is unbelievable."
Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am with Travis McIntire, the publisher of Source Point Press and the CEO of Oxeye Media. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's a good day to be doing this. It's a Friday, going into the weekend. Can you give us some of your background as to how you got into this business?
Sure. Let's see. I was always a huge fan of comics, of course, growing up. I sort of came of age in the mid to late 80s and then got really into, was sort of just old enough to kind of get into like the first wave of, well, maybe not the original first wave, but certainly the late 80s, early 90s of indie comic publishing. So, the early Caliber comics and, so like a lot of the black and white at that time. So I was really into comics of a lot of different, not just superhero stuff at a relatively young age, my early teens. And then, I was a pretty big customer of comics. I was definitely a hardcore reader and a hardcore collector for a long time. And then about 10 years ago, around the time my first son was born, I got sort of interested in doing something different with my life than what I was doing. So I wrote a comic, hired an artist, made one, got it published, thought like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. I can do that again. Had it not go anywhere, do all that. But in the course of that, I became friends with Gary Reed, who was the publisher and owner of Caliber Comics, which is a Detroit-based publisher who did stuff like The Crow and Dead World, Realm, and things like that. And I was a huge admirer of those things from the 90s. And so, we had sort of become friends, and I had done some work for Caliber, and he published one of my books. And, I had sort of just become, I was an okay writer, I would say mediocre, maybe at best. But I was a really good project manager, and I was, pretty strong at like doing editorial work and keeping people on track and getting a project to the finish line. And so he, with his encouragement and advice, and then I met Josh Werner, who still works with me today, who was doing like the proto Source Point Press at the time. So I met him, and then we kind of got together, and then just kind of launched the company for real. And then 8 years later, here we are.
Very cool. What would you say? Because the late 80s, that's kind of the golden age for indie comics publishing. What wouldn't you say?
I think, yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough. I think it depends on what you. I think if you go back to that time period and you look at the stuff that's coming out, the fact that many of the creators who did those things now considered legends, that's it was certainly a great. But I don't know that if you can really compete with what's happening right now, just in terms of the impact of the independent publisher, the small publisher, self-publisher, with things like the explosion of digital publishing and the ease of digital publishing. and you know, things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and all that, what have you. I don't know that independently created IP has ever had more of an impact than it does right now. I think that you could make a really strong argument. Right now is the golden age of small press, self-publishing, and independently published.
That's a good point. Like lots of autonomy
Well,
right now.
yeah, and you know, I try to be always as upfront, honest with any critics I can. And like, I had a meeting with a guy last night who has a product that I think is a home run. I think it's a great project, and you know, I was kind of like laying out like, this is what we would do. This is the distribution line. This is where print budget we're talking about. This is, you know, we have an output booster, so this schedule is what we do. And then I told him, all that aside, this is a really wonderful idea. I see stuff all the time, you know, 200 pitches a month. And this is a great idea. To be perfectly frank, you could make $100,000. Like this is a home run. You don't need me or any other publisher to do this. You could kill this on your own, you know. And there's just a ton of stuff out there that's like that, you know. I mean, I think if you look at some of the stuff when we think of like, you know, monster indie comics, I think everybody thinks of like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the prototypical, like, this is how big you can be.
It's a fluke, and that one's a fluke.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was made as a joke, you know, like, but I think that in 20 years, we're going to look back at some of the stuff that was created by guys who were doing their issue one on Kickstarter, you know, and we're gonna be like, man, can you believe this dude did this after raising $1,500, you know, from 100 friends? You know, I think that some of that stuff is just going to be completely eclipsed, just because the ability for one person, if they pay attention and they try to learn what they're doing, you know, the ability of one person to make such a high quality product is unprecedented, right? You know, so it's pretty cool. It's a cool time to be to be a publisher, and it's a cool time to be a creator.
It's changed the game like completely, because you don't have to meet like a big giant bulk of orders, right? In order to kind of put out the books that you want to put out. You just kind of have to meet what was pledged. Do I have that right? Yeah.
The way so I mean, the way we do it is, so we run a couple of Kickstarters a year for books, and you know, we have one running now that's going pretty well, really exceeding our expectations. So what we do is, when we do one, we try to go into it knowing that we're going to have a certain budget set aside to print as many of the books as possible, right? So we're not looking at a Kickstarter in terms of like, how much profit are we going to get in our pockets from a Kickstarter? You know, we kind of look at everything as a percentage. Like, so going into it, I want to be like, okay, whatever this number that the bank is, I want to take 30% of that, and that's my budget to print as many books as possible, because that's the number of books that build orders and go into distribution. So for us, it's always, you know, it's always like just making a bigger investment. But I think that for the individual creator, I think it's smart. You get 1,000 backers and you get 1,000 books, print 1,000. Don't print that 1,000. You know? Print 1,000 and then get that done, and then come and talk to a guy like you who has a warehouse and put your book into distribution. And we'll print the 10,000. You know.
Let's talk about one of the books that you guys have on the Kickstarter right now. It's called Butts in Seats: The Tony Schiavone Story. I'm a big fan of professional wrestling. Were you a big fan of professional wrestling growing up?
Yeah, I mean, a huge fan. I was some of the guys who have agreed to do promos for us, like, were guys I would have never dreamed would have been willing. You know, like some of the ones that we haven't announced yet that are going to be coming are nuts. Absolutely. And you know, this is from like the guys who are kind of new or darlings on the indie scene, you know, like Ricky Stark or MJF. to like, I mean, a couple of them we're talking about like living legend level guys. And I mean, that just speaks to like the amount of goodwill that Tony has in the industry.
Yeah.
People who are like, oh, you want me to cut a promo on you for this book? Yeah, I'll do that. But it's been pretty astonishing, like far beyond my expectations. This whole thing started because, I mean, the cheesiest possible way. I'm friends with Tony's lawyer, right? Who's a guy who lives in Ohio, and we met through. I don't know if you remember Rhino,
Yeah.
the wrestler Rhino. So he's a Michigan guy. We're a Michigan. He does a small wrestling promotion out of Detroit. And it's really cool. And we sponsor at every event that they do. I go down. It's awesome. It's so much fun. Anyway, Dawkins was from Ohio, and he had come up for a show because he represents a lot of wrestling. And I believe that he was actually there because he works for Billy Gunn, and Billy Gunn was like the name that month, like this is a couple years back. And so I met him, and got to chatting, and Dirk was there. And then one thing sort of led to another, and it was like, oh, yeah, it would be awesome to do some kind of autobiographical thing, and this is around the time that Cornette's book was coming out.
Yeah.
And we thought that was really cool. We just wanted to do, we wanted to do one that we thought was even better. Part of that for us was the idea of the announcer, right? Because in wrestling, the announcer is the guy he's advocating for the story. Like he's advocating, who's like what's going on. He's not really he's not telling you the story. So this wrestling shop, he's advocating. And, in a way, that's kind of how I see my role, right, as a publisher. Is I'm advocating. So we thought we could do something, kind of take after talking to Tony, we thought we could take like an autobiographical look at this and kind of shift the perspective of wrestling a little bit. That's different from what maybe other wrestling books or comics have done.
Yeah.
And it worked out really, really well. Shavani has been just,
He's
incredibly easy to work with.
Yeah.
He is, but he's incredibly easy to work with and incredibly gracious. I mean, I don't know if you've ever run a Kickstarter, how familiar you are with it, but it's a ton of work.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, people don't realize, like, yeah, you got to post about this and talk about it, push it and all this. People don't want to do it. Tony's like, he's all in, so it's been great. It's been really, really good. He's super easy to work with. We had all these long series of Zoom calls where it started off with just like listening to stories, which was awesome. Like if you're a fan, especially if you're a fan my age, because I remember the Butts and Seats call.
Yeah.
Like I was watching. I'm like 18 years old. So you're hearing all these stories, kind of like some of the behind the scenes parts that you didn't even realize. So that was awesome. So several meetings of just listening to stories, and then we kind of picked out 10 that we thought like these ones are winners, and these ones sort of fit this arc. And then it was a matter of like, okay, we'd script it, take it back, Tony read the script, give notes, do that again. And it was an easy and fun process. I think the book is awesome, and I think people are going to love it. And the Kickstarter is, I'll be completely honest. We thought like, okay, 20,000 is probably easily doable. We'll probably end somewhere in the 30 to 40,000 range. We'll put stretch goals up to 70. We'll put stretch goals up to 70, and then that'll be that. But that's literally what when we had, because we do a lot of planning, because we do, we've done this quite a few times, and then it was like within a couple hours it had blown past 20, and then within a few more hours it had blown past 30, and then so by the time it had blown through our last stretch goal, we're like, okay, well, what else do you want to do to this book? So we going back and forth of like, trying to come up with new ideas that sort of fit into what we're trying to do, that we can get approval from everybody on, and but it's been it's a great problem to have.
At the time of this recording, with 21 days left to go, you have 1,593 backers and $91,868 pledged.
Yeah, I mean, I don't,
insane.
Yeah, it's probably got a pretty fair chance of breaking into 6 figures.
And I think a lot of this is because there is a fairly big overlap, right, between wrestling fans and comics fans.
I think that they are often the same sort of person. I think that there are things about wrestling and things about comics that are very similar. One of the main ones is that they are both oh boy, it's not a good sentence. They are both simultaneously a like cutting edge way of telling a story, and also like steeped in this like bizarre ritual and traditionalism, right? So like comics is sort of like the last vestige of the periodical successful. It's a strange thing. People buy comics, like a ton of readers do it because of the ritual. Like I put in my order with the store a month ahead of time. I show up on Wednesdays. I go in, we have this conversation. I get my stack of books. I come home, I read them. That's my thing. It's my ritual. I do it. And there isn't really a lot of things that are similar to that. When you think about it, it starts becoming the only things that are close are like maybe going to a bar, or if you have a favorite restaurant. Like it's a very like different way of consuming media than what like the modern world generally does, and yet it persists, right? Physical sales of comics still dwarf digital sales. So it's interesting in that way to me, like the dichotomy of how traditional and sort of like old timey it is. And then wrestling is very similar in that, wrestling is sort of like this bizarre vaudevillian form of entertainment that is, fully digitized. And when you think about it, like in what other space are these actors and athletes? They're both at the same time, and they're both at the same time expected to be both the character and themselves on social media 24 hours a day, all the time. Like sometimes in kayfabe, sometimes not, sometimes working, sometimes shooting. Like it's an insane thing. And at the same time, not COVID notwithstanding, but most of the time, it's like this super bizarre type of entertainment where you have an arena full of people, all of whom are well aware that they're watching a scripted event. And they're all collectively deciding to put that aside and become a part of the story.
Exactly.
To boo when they're supposed to boo, cheer when they're supposed to cheer, and the performers, the audience have to work together to like actually create the emotion. I've been to dozens and dozens of these. It's like they work together to create that emotion, and nothing. I don't know of anything else that quite does that the same way. Right? Like you can go to a sporting event, and it is what it is, but it's not the same. It isn't this like everybody gets together to have this like shared happy delusion of we're gonna set aside our disbelief, we get into this, but we're also part of it. Like we have to buy into it to make it happen. And at the same time, there's like this weird meta level of entertainment going on where it's like, if a heel who's getting booed is good unless it's bad. Unless all of a sudden it's like they're getting the wrong kind of heat, and then you get the backstage and it's like, well, that guy's not getting over, so we got to replace him and change what he's doing. So it's like these multiple levels of storytelling going on, and I think that they're similar in that way. If any of that made any sense, because that was sort of a free associative bunch of nonsense, possibly. I don't know.
Wrestling is fascinating because it is like the only art form in the world, I feel like, that makes no secret of the fact that the primary goal is to draw money by putting butts in seats. And that's a nice plug for your title right there. But
Yeah, thank you.
In 1989, I watched my very first ever wrestling tape, which was SummerSlam 1989, which was called by Tony Schiavone and Rowdy Piper. And I thought the Ultimate Warrior was fighting Rick Rude, and Tony Schiavone was just calling the match like really insanely, like really made me believe in the Ultimate Warrior, which was, I realize now, a very tall task because he was ridiculous. The Ultimate Warrior was ridiculous. But
Yeah.
and then 10 years later, he said the infamous butts in seats line. Would you know how Tony feels about using what was, what was essentially a wrong line? It's famous for the wrong reasons, but it's his most
It,
popular line.
I think that the way he looks at it and the way many, many people in that industry work is it is a huge mark of respect if you can take the wrong kind of people and make it the right kind of people. And I think that's the way he sees butts and seats. I would maybe, like, in a very loose way, compare it to John Cena,
Okay.
who for many years was like booed and people didn't like it. They didn't like anything.
Oh, you got muted. There you go.
Now they're booing because of love. Now it's all this like big, yeah, of course we chant John Cena stuff because it's,
Yeah,
I mean, I myself have done it.
I have also done it.
So
without meaning it at all, it's just part of the act,
right?
right?
No, yeah, exactly true. It is part of part of the shtick. I think that Tony, while at the time when he did the butts and seats line, I think that it certainly didn't work out the way that WCW intended it to work out. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that they probably underestimated the regard for Mick Foley amongst the wrestling watching. Sorry about that. I adjusted mine. But as the years have gone by, it has turned into this thing that was sort of like, oh, this was an embarrassing thing. Now it's like, yeah, it's the thing I said, and it's in the lexicon. And it's a historical event. It is part of his history, and it's such a perfect title for what it is. Yeah, but he didn't have a problem with it. I mean, when we pitched it to him, he was like, "It's great. I love it. It's perfect."
Would you say, given all that when it comes to pro wrestling, the most important thing is to be remembered at all?
Yeah, I think that's like probably like 99% true. I think that most of the time, if you're being remembered at all, it's good. I think there are a few examples where it's bad, but most of the time, I think that if you're making an impact in the business, then you're probably doing it.
I can really only think of one example where it's bad. His name is Chris Benoit.
Yeah, that one, yeah, is certainly one that comes to mind.
Yeah. Tony Schiavone. How much input did he have in going into the story? When putting together the story, yeah.
A ton. I mean, they're all his stories, scripted from the notes we took while we were talking to him. He did full editorial control over everything. He tweaked tons of lines to make them either more accurate, or sometimes in cases where it's like, well, that isn't exactly what they said, but we wanted to capture like because it's still a comic, so you're still kind of cutting some corners to try to get to the point. You want it to. It's more important for it to be true than factual necessarily.
That's wrestling.
That makes sense. Yeah. So we wanted it to feel true. Like, this is how they talk. This is what it sounded like. But yeah, he got a ton, and he still does to this day. We're still communicating on a very regular basis.
Can you give me an example of something that was changed from something factual to something true?
That is a tough question. The one that comes to mind immediately, only because we were working on it just recently, is one of the stretch goals, and it's for a 4-page short, and it was a little throwaway story he told about Sting while they were on a cruise ship event, and it had to do with this. They were watching some performers do a thing, and Sting was. It turns out Sting was working Tony, right? And about Sting being upset for a specific reason, for a very wrestler reason, and it turned out Sting was all this sort of work, and because we were trying to put this into a 4-page bonus story that we unlocked stretch goal. I think what we did is, one, we shrunk it down a lot. We basically shrunk the whole thing down to one conversation, that took place while they were watching one event. And we made it feel a lot more like it was a joke, like it was a setup, punchline, badum-tish, and on, as opposed to something that sort of stretched out over several things and maybe a little bit more of a long practical joke, or a rib, basically. We wanted to include a rib, because it's a big thing in wrestling. Wrestlers and announcers rib each other. We wanted to include something along those lines. And this is one of those stories, but because of the medium of comics, we had to kind of truncate it. We basically told it as a joke, as opposed to sort of a longer thing. That's not a great example, but it comes to mind right away. Plus, I get to talk about it.
If Tony Schiavone, so one of the things that I like to do on the show is before the whole interview, I like to put in a little excerpt from the interview, and then go into the interview. So I'm going to ask you something, which is, for the excerpt that goes on before the interview airs, can you tell us a story that would maybe only be revealed in this book, that you think would get wrestling fans to go, oh man, I got to hear the rest of this?
Oh, geez. Oh man, I think like something that you would use as a promo,
like a tiny little teaser.
Oh man, how about something like this morning?
Okay.
This morning I got sent a new promo that Tony got recorded over the weekend, and we use an internal messaging file sharing. And I got it. I watched it. Posted up. This is unbelievable. Like, how did you get this guy promo? And one of my employees was like, "Are you fanboying out right now?" It's like, it's called marketing when you do it. So I'll put it out. I've been a fan almost my entire life, and some of the guys who are getting involved are making me be like, "This is unbelievable."
Very cool. Dirk Manning is writing this. How is he approaching the writing aspect?
I mean, Dirk tends to work in like broad strokes, right? So, we have meetings, he talks, he listens to Tony, he asks a lot of questions about things like, well, what did this person mean? Or he's trying to get to the meat of what a story actually is, as opposed to the details of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then generally speaking, so my role in this has mostly been like editorial or project type of stuff. And so what Dirk then does, he takes like a first pass in the script, which is usually, it won't be paneled out or paged out or anything like that. It won't be laid out as anything that would resemble like a traditional comic script, if there is such a thing, which I don't know if there is. I see them hundreds of different ways. you don't see like page 1, 5 panel 1. It won't be anything like that. It'll look like maybe look a little bit more like a screenplay, but it'll just be like kind of dialogue laid out. And that's sort of like the first pass. Usually, this what I get is something along those lines. And the idea there is we want to get notes back from Tony about like, okay, how do you feel about these exchanges? How do you feel about this dialogue? How do you feel about the flow of the story? Does this feel right? Once we kind of have that, then it's a matter of like going back and start almost like we're just taking the stuff and turning it into a movie. Still, then we're paneling after the fact and kind of putting it together. And that probably comes from, I think that comes from Dirk's background, maybe of being a horror writer, because so much of trying to successfully write a horror in a comic book is about understanding the timing of how people are reading the page and when you're going to do a reveal, how fast or slow people tend to read a page, how many words you're going to put on a page to control that rate at which they're going to be moving through. So that's kind of the process, which is a little bit different. I feel like maybe most of the scripts I see are usually someone's more like writing a comic page.
Mm-hmm.
But with this, it was a little bit different. You're dealing with someone else's life, and you want them to be fully involved. And you don't want the nightmare scenario where you do something that they come out and like don't like it. We wanted this to feel right and true, so it was done in stages of baby steps, I would say. I mean, it took we worked on this for a long time. This was over a year of back and forth and writing scripts and talking to artists and getting samples. I mean, all kinds of stuff.
How did you select the artists? There's a lot of artists on this book. How did you end up selecting the artists?
Yeah, it started with Dirk had a handful of people that he wanted to work with. Some that he'd worked with before, and some that were he wanted to get, and so we went out and started talking to them and kind of made offers and sent contracts, and we got a core, maybe half of them got right away, and kind of started having to do some work, or at least trying to like plan. Like, we have this story coming and we want this type of style, so and then kind of as the books took shape and the 10 main stories started to get closer to being sort of done, we as it started to get closer to being done, we kind of started to try to like be like, okay, it's this kind of story, we want this type of artist, who do we know? And so I brought in a couple people that I'd worked with before that I really liked, and then we had a couple of guys that the only guy we didn't really get was Kevin Keane, and we've worked with him before and he's wonderful, and we didn't get him because Todd McFarlane just hired him to do the Spawn universe. So we couldn't quite compete with that, unfortunately. But otherwise, everybody, it was really easy. And we tried to find people who were, that were wrestling fans and would be into doing it. And for the most part, it was easy to find the artists. It was a lot harder to kind of like pick what type of style would fit each story best. Because we tried to have a good mix of like, okay, so this is more of a nostalgic story. This has emotion in it. This is funny, things like that. But yeah, there's a ton of artists. All great.
The getting the wrestling promos to push the book to push the book. You're saying that you got some of the newer crowd in, and now you're getting some living legends that you haven't released yet. Is one of them Sting?
I'm not talking about who any of them are. Nope. They're no.
Yeah.
I mean, we did get Bischoff. That was pretty awesome. My favorite one that we've released so far is that one was my favorite. Plus, I think that was awesome. So that was the best.
Because
well, I mean, in my opinion,
Tony's working in AEW right now, and I was wondering how long does this book end up going for? Like, where's it gonna stop?
So right now it goes all the way up to, I believe, just past the first AEW paper.
Okay.
So it gets through All In Chicago and to the like formation, the official formation of AEW, and then that's kind of where it cuts off. So, I mean, it'd be cool to do. I think there's some stuff going around that we've talked about that we'd like to do. I mean, there's so many cool stories there you can do some interesting things with. Like I think it would be amazing to just do something similar to this, but have it be completely based around the All In Chicago independent paper, right? And tell the backstage stories and like the business side of how that whole thing came together, because that was an unprecedented event. Like there'd never been something of that size, that successful, that big, sold out pay-per-views, big, huge names without any support, any like heavyweight promotion, and that's a really interesting story, that of all the things behind the scenes that made it happen. That's something I think you could do an entire book just around like, I mean, it would be probably impossible to get everything lined up to do it, but if you could get like, okay, this is Cody's point, this is the book, these are all these different people, how it coalesced into one amazing, I think it's awesome.
That's another thing is like, you're telling the story of Tony Schiavone's career, but I feel like the way wrestling is, each event is its own possible book. So are you looking to do this more in the future aside from just All In?
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's several things kind of in the pipeline, especially with this one having success that it's having. There's several things I think in the pipeline that are really interesting and will make for some very cool, autobiographical kind of behind the scenes, wrestling based graphic novels and comics and things like that. I bring up the All In one because that's one I personally think would be awesome to me. That is not something I'm going to try now.
Okay. What would you say is the running theme for Tony Schiavone's story?
The running theme is storytellers. I think for me, that's the most important theme of the whole thing. I think that at the end of the day, that's how Tony views wrestlers and the business in a storytelling medium. I think he views himself as someone who is someone whose job it is to advocate that these stories are getting over to the crowd. And I don't know that it's his view, but it's certainly my view and many others' view that he's one of the best in the business at that. So storytelling, I think, is the theme of the whole book.
There's something meta about telling a story about a storyteller who tells stories about other storytellers, isn't there?
Yeah, that's sort of the whole thing, is that like almost like cyclical weirdness of
every book, every story with has a main character and a supporting cast. Who would you say is Tony Schiavone's main supporting cast member? Like, does anyone show up more than anyone else in the book?
Probably Sting is the I mean, they're close, and I think that if you, they're personally close, and their careers are together for most of the time. For many years, Sting is a top star, and Tony is the top guy, right? As far as announcers go. And then, once you get away from like the butts and seats call, I think Tony is also probably almost as well known for the "It's Sting," calls. And we certainly hit on that. Like that's a huge paid it's Sting, and down the rafters and all that kind of stuff. So I think probably in terms of like wrestlers, I think Sting is probably the I mean, that'd be a great question to ask Tony. But to me, I think,
Is there a villain in Tony Schiavone's story?
not really. Not really. I mean, we certainly don't. We're certainly not out to try to bury anybody. We're just out to tell the
Yeah.
actual stories of what is happening. I think another one that's probably pretty close is Eric Bischoff, because he was pretty instrumental to a lot of the career. But I don't think that there's a villain so much as it's just the idea of, can you make a story successful or not, even if the story isn't good. If that.
I gotta ask this question. I know, I'll take it off if you can't answer this. I gotta ask this question. In WCW, it was notorious that Hollywood Hulk Hogan had creative control of his own character. Did Tony say if it caused any problems?
I mean, Tony did not. I mean, I think it certainly. I think it certainly caused some issues. These are well documented. All the Jeff Jarrett stuff, and Vince Russo, and all that kind of stuff.
Booker
So
T.
I think, yeah, I think that it. I think that it certainly caused problems. But Tony also is a guy who has a lot of respect for the business and has a lot of respect for people in the business, and he doesn't bury anybody about anything. I think he looks at it like, hey, it's a business, and everybody's trying to do the best they can in the business, the best they can for themselves, the best they can for the business. That was the world that they lived in at the time. Those were the parameters of the contract that he signed, and those are the details we have to live with.
That's very cool of him. You read all of these wrestling books, and it's there's a lot of burying going on in a lot of wrestling books, so it's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I don't think he'd be too upset. I say, I think the only grumbling I ever really heard from him, and this again, he might have even been working a little bit when he was doing the grumbling, was probably about Impact.
Oh,
because he worked for Impact for one day.
Yeah.
And I guess it went pretty badly. He had a pretty bad experience. And now of course AEW and Impact are kind of doing some things together. You have the good, Gallows and Anderson are kind of bouncing around, and Kenny Omega is going back and forth. And I think Tony might have been working a little bit, because I think he's supposed to think that those guys suck, but that's probably the only grumbling I heard was, a little bit of minor, oh yeah, we've got these, the Impact guys, great, that kind of.
That's great. That goes to your point that says that 24/7 they're themselves and they're their character, right? He might be working himself.
Well, yeah, sometimes I think. But yeah, it's all the time. They're all so many of MJF is a good example. His public persona all the time is MJF. All the time. It isn't when he cut that promo for us, it was as MJF. He's in character all the time. And you think about it, it's gotta be just exhausting. But I mean, he's a younger guy. He's this old school dude. It's no, this is who I am. You got to almost think if someone ran into him at a wedding and recognized him as MJF, he cut a promo on him as a heel. It's nuts, but it's awesome. It's awesome.
Can you talk about some of your stretch goals for a bit? I see here that some people, you have the hardcover, you have a DRM free PDF,
Yeah.
the soft cover. I also see that if you pledge $350, people get to talk to Tony.
Yeah, those sold out on the first day.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So you get like, it's just anything that we could get Tony to sort of volunteer to do.
That's awesome.
Like, so it calls with Tony. There were 3 like come to an AEW event and have dinner with Tony and get like a backstage experience kind of thing. Those were all disappeared. I mean, he's a cool.
That's incredible. Like these are limited and they sold out on the first day.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A very successful Kickstarter.
Yeah, it's been nuts. I think we potentially underestimated like the fan response that Tony would get. But I mean, it just speaks to like how much regard he has in the industry. You know, like that people genuinely like him. They genuinely know he's a good dude. They genuinely want to help him out. They genuinely want to get behind him and hear his stories. So we were just sort of lucky that we kind of stumbled into him and became pals. And we're like, hey, let's make a comic. And he was like, yeah, what the hell? We'll make a comic. So it worked out great.
What would you say was in Tony's career the most pivotal moment, the most historic moment in all of wrestling? Would you say it was the NWO, or was it actually butts and seats?
I think butts and seats is cool, but I think that probably, you know, the most pivotal moment is Hulk Hogan's turn at what was the pay-per-view? Bash at the Beach.
Bash at the Beach, yeah.
I can't remember what year. 96.
It was 96.
96. Boy, we are nerds. That turn where Hogan turned, and you know, he did the another really famous call, the "Damn you, Hogan," and all, you know, that.
Yeah.
The trash is raining down. You know, and Hulk Hogan he's a controversial figure, you know, yeah. And it is what it is. I mean, I was sort of blown away when I saw he was announced as the host of WrestleMania this year.
I know.
Well, that seems soon. He should, but whatever. I mean, it's not up to me. He's a controversial figure, but you can't. I think it would be difficult to underestimate his historical importance to the business of that created the ability for a guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin to still be a top merchandise seller 15 years after his career, or enable like a guy like The Rock to become the highest paid movie star in history, things like that. I think that, you know, it's difficult to underestimate Hulk Hogan's impact. And this is a guy who, for many of us, myself included at the time, this was the quintessential good guy through our childhood, through the 80s, right? This was the good guy. And at this event, at this time, for the first time that I mean, probably, you know, deep in the annals of like indie wrestling or territory days, there are examples of Terry Bollea or Hulk Hogan being the heel.
Yeah.
But in my experience, I knew him as the WWF champion, the yellow, you know, prayers, vitamins, all the normal stuff. He was the face, like the definition of face. So that heel turn, I think, historically significant.
I think one of the things about that heel turn was that Tony saved it because Bobby Heenan almost ruined it.
Did he?
Because you know, he's coming down and Tony's all like, oh, thank God, here's Hulk Hogan. And then Bobby Heenan goes, but whose side is he on?
Oh, that's right, he did.
And then Tony said, what are you talking about? Whose side is he on? So
yeah,
that was a good save by Tony right there.
Man, like it would have been, Heenan would be another one if he were still alive. It would be a great one to do a comic. That'd be excellent. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the Hogan turn call is I think will and ultimately end up being the most historically significant. It also, like, you know, had it reverberated through the business side of the whole thing, right? Because that's sort of, now you went through and you had like the 82 weeks of WCW being on top, and we're still, you know, if you're a fan of wrestling, the Monday Night Wars are still something that, you know, the shockwaves of are still happening.
We still
You
talk
know?
about it.
I mean, when AEW when AEW went to Wednesday, and then shortly thereafter, you know, they announced that, oh, NXT is going to go to USA on Wednesdays. Like, I think it was probably 2 seconds later, the first person commented in online that, oh, now it's the Wednesday Night Wars. You know, like, it is still very much an ingrained part of wrestling culture.
Yeah.
That whole thing, which, you know, sort of, that was a big part of it.
And speaking of Tony's main supporting character, that's also the storyline that, you know, changed Sting forever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I, in my opinion, like, for the absolute better. You know, I mean, it's there are so many people who don't really even know of Surfer Sting, you know, like, or like that character doesn't resonate with them at all. But like Crow Sting, the one that feels like a comic book character, like that Sting that's the iconic Sting. Like when you think of Sting, you know, that's the Sting you think of, and that Sting is a direct result of that heel turn, and probably one of the best. It's up there with the, you know, evil Mr. McMahon, like Steve Austin storyline.
Yeah.
It's up there. The whole, like, the NWO run is one of the best angles of all time. You know, it's certainly like all wrestling angles. It
went too long.
Overstayed its welcome. Too long, got silly. But that is one of the things about wrestling that makes it awesome, is that it can get so ridiculously silly that it sort of like circles its way back to great. Just like with John Cena, you know, it's like, we actually think you suck and we don't like you. Wait, no, we do. Now we say you suck because we love you.
Now please don't go, John Cena.
Yeah, please don't go. Please come
Yeah.
back. I'll do anything to see the 5 minutes of Doom again. You know, like
So
it's like that. Yeah.
yeah. So I just want to ask about something else, which is Source Point Press is distributed by Simon and Schuster.
Yep. Well, and Diamond Comics distribution, obviously.
We're seeing that kind of move lately to multiple distributors. How does that affect the business?
Oof, that's a very big question. That's a whole other interview.
Okay, never mind.
That's a really big question. In a lot of ways, I'm hoping that it ultimately is going to affect the business in a positive way. But it's a really big question, and it goes back a long time to the formation of the direct market and the creation of Diamond, and the fall of Capital Comics distribution, and when Diamond sort of became a monolith, and how all those things, you know, are working together. It probably has a lot to do with the fact that, you know, Marvel and DC are now owned by Disney and AT&T respectively, and giant corporations like that operate at a different level than any publisher does, and have different expectations and want different things. And then add to that now, you know, Random House buying Simon & Schuster, becoming the largest publisher and distributor in the world by a huge factor. It's a pretty interesting time. You know, so for us, distributing with Simon & Schuster was a way for us to launch a book, to do prose novels and things like that. They were, I think, very aggressively trying to get comic publishers to come over. For us, you know, we have always maintained independence in our distribution, so we never signed an exclusive with anybody. So it was a kind of a no-brainer for us to do. They're one of the world's largest publishers. It's a huge plus for us to be in their catalog. It's a huge plus for us to get that rub, to use some wrestling terminology, from them. So, I mean, for us, it's been a giant positive. For the long-term effects of the business, I think, I want to say, because I tend to be somewhat optimistic, I want to say that in the long term, I think it is going to be good for the industry. if for no other reason than, even though what we're talking about are, you know, like one of the best things I saw was a retailer online yesterday, because you probably saw that Marvel is now going to be distributing them monthly. Really unprecedented. And that's not going to be like when DC switched. When DC left, they were like, oh, here's a startup, and we're going to distribute through this startup. And then, of course, it was like a huge disaster, and one of the startups failed after a couple of months. It was a real problem. No, Marvel is going with Random House, which is an enormous company who knows what they're doing, and it will probably be pretty good. And the way I look at it is that I think that the direct market retailers, the ones who are thriving and who have survived through COVID and are hardworking people who spend 20 hours a day at their stores, I think that what it's going to do is give them more options to do what's best for their market, what's best for their stores. And in my opinion, as a small press publisher who distributes across the board in lots of different ways, the more retailers who are open to ordering from different avenues, the better. So even though I don't know that, what the retailer said was, so we're breaking up with Dr. Doom to date Galactus, which I thought was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. You're taking like, sure, this is a kind of a monolithic company, but it's in this very niche industry, and now you're going to tie it to this, enormous like global corporation, and we're going to pretend like, oh, well, no more monopoly. No. Like, if anything, now, like,
it's not a win for the little guy, is it?
Yeah, we could be moving into like, some kind of like Blade Runner scenario. I don't know. But I think that what it does ultimately is it boils down to readers, and it boils down to the retailers. And if they're getting more and better options, I think that is good for all of us. And I think, this is a big opportunity for Diamond to sort of modernize some of the things it does, and maybe do some things better for some of the smaller and mid-sized publishers that were sort of being crowded out by Marvel and DC, is maybe that starts to level a little bit, and the market share for some of the smaller publishers we've been seeing happen for years starts to move up. We'll see how it shakes out. It's going to be really, there's a lot of ins and outs.
Interesting.
But I remain hopeful.
So do I. What would you say is the mission statement of SourcePoint Press, like, and for the benefit of aspiring creators watching this? If you were looking for something in particular that you want pitched to you, what's the kind of thing you guys would be looking for?
I think that our mission statement is probably something along the lines of like to do the best we can to provide a platform for people to tell like real stories, authentic stories. Like, this is not necessarily to say we want to do fiction. Most of what we do is fiction, but authentic, diverse story is sort of what our mission statement is. For submissions, you can send stuff to submissions@sourcepointpress.com. We are kind of always looking. We probably meet once a month and go over stuff. Things that we look for are, I think, craft. We want stuff that when I look at books, stuff that kind of gets me excited are things that where even the pitch, I can tell that the person really cares that the presentation of this looks good and it's crafted. And so what that does for me is it makes me think that this person takes it seriously and is going to be engaged in the process from the beginning to the end. Because we're a smaller publisher, we do a lot of marketing and we spend a lot of money on marketing, but we need creators to be in there with us. We need them to get in the ring and be with us through the whole process. And so when we're looking at pitches and things, we're looking at not just the pitch, not just the story, not just your art. We also my submissions editor pulls up, who are you? And we look at how do you talk? How do you present yourself online? How often do you talk about the work you're doing? Do people engage with you? And I don't care if you have 1 million followers or 5 followers. What I care about is, like, are you enthusiastic? Are you trying to engage with leadership, to be interested? Because ultimately, what I want is people who are engaged, who care about the thing that they're making, and want to get in and fight for that reader. Because that is literally what it's like. It's like this is a very open business, and people are very welcoming, and it's not a hard business to break into. It's a hard business to stay in because it is very, very, it's smaller. It's not like board games, which is the other side of our company, which is growing and growing and growing. $29 billion a year industry. This is a small $1.9 billion a year industry that is dominated by basically 2 companies that are backed by 2 of the world's largest corporations. We want creators who are engaged in their product and in their creation and care about it from the very beginning. So I think, craft is something I really look for. Enthusiasm and the desire to be like, yeah, I want to get the word. Nobody can market. Like I told Shavani, about the Kickstarter. I'm like, we can do what we're going to do. We're going to put ad money behind this. We're going to do this. We're going to post about it. Nobody can activate your fans like you. I can't do it. Nobody else can activate your fans. This is the same for comic creators, right? Especially for creator-owned or new IP type stuff. Like, we're not selling Batman, but there isn't 80 years of cultural momentum to make people buy this. There isn't all this continuity that people are already invested in. There isn't already all these buyers who buy it because they can't miss the next one. None of that exists. You have to get in and fight, build your readership from ground up one time. And so that's sort of a main thing